Have you ever wondered where the story of the vampire truly began? Before Hollywood glamorized Dracula, before Bram Stoker gave us the image of a sophisticated count cloaked in velvet and mystery, there was another creature, older, darker, and far more terrifying. In the remote villages of Romania, where the Carpathian Mountains rise like jagged teeth against the night sky, whispers told of beings who refused to rest in their graves, spirits that clawed their way back into the world of the living, not as elegant aristocrats, but as restless, hungry shadows of what they once were. They were called the Strigoi. The Strigoi were not myths told for entertainment. They were explanations for sudden sickness, for children who wasted away, for animals found dead in their stables. Villagers believed their own neighbors, their own family members, could return from the grave to torment them. And unlike the Dracula of fiction, these monsters were not bound by castles or noble bloodlines. They were everywhere, hidden in the unmarked graves outside the village, in the strange behavior of the sick, in the restless dreams of those who had crossed paths with the supernatural. In this documentary, we'll go far beyond the familiar vampire tales. We'll trace the ancient origins of the Strigoi, back to pagan rituals and early Christian fears. We'll uncover the chilling difference between the living Strigoi, cursed humans who carry darkness in life, and the dead Strigoi, corpses that rose to drink the life of the living. Furthermore, we'll explore the terrifying rituals of protection, where villagers drove stakes through the hearts of their own dead and burned their corpses in midnight ceremonies. We'll hear of real cases, some as recent as the 21st century, where Romanian communities dug up graves in secret, convinced the Strigoi was haunting them. And finally, we'll see how these ancient fears gave birth to Dracula, the world's most famous vampire. This is not just a folklore story, it is a story about fear, fear of death, of disease, of the unknown that lurks in the dark. And if you think the Strigoi are just tales of the past, think again. Even today, in certain corners of Romania, villagers still leave offerings, still whisper prayers, glance nervously into the night just in case. So sit back, turn down the lights, and remember this. Before Dracula, there were the Strigoi. To understand the Strigoi, we have to travel thousands of years into the past, to a time before Romania even existed as a nation. The land we now call Romania was once home to the Dacians, an ancient people who believed the boundary between the living and the dead was fragile, dangerously fragile. The Dacians worshipped a god of the underworld named Zalmoxis. His followers believed death was not the end, but a passage into another existence. Yet within that belief lingered a darker possibility. If a soul did not pass peacefully, it could linger among the living. These restless souls became the first seeds of the Strigoi myth. But the idea didn't stop there. The Dacians also feared a terrifying night creature, a bird-like spirit that could steal a person's vitality. Some scholars believe this legend fused with Roman mythology when the empire conquered the region. The Romans had their own nightmare figure, the Strix, a bloodthirsty owl witch said to drain the life of infants. Do you hear the echo in the name? Strix, Strigoi. Over centuries, the Roman Strix merged with local Dacian spirits, creating a unique hybrid monster, a restless soul that could both haunt dreams and feed on blood. This was the beginning of a legend that would outlive empires. When Christianity spread through Eastern Europe, the Church tried to suppress these pagan fears. But instead of erasing them, Christianity only reshaped them. The restless dead became linked to sin and divine punishment. Villagers were told that those who lived wicked lives, thieves, murderers, sorcerers, could not rest in holy ground. Instead, their souls wandered, cursed to rise as Strigoi. The idea was terrifying. It meant anyone who lived wrongly could return after death, not as a spirit of peace, but as a monster of hunger. And these fears weren't abstract. Villagers believed the Strigoi could cause real harm. A Strigoi could sicken cattle, leaving entire villages starving. They could curse crops, withering fields overnight. They could steal life itself, draining the strength of neighbors, especially children, until they wasted away. Death wasn't the end of fear. In fact, death was only the beginning. But how would you know if a loved one might return as a Strigoi? Villagers watched closely for signs. If a child was born with a caul, a thin membrane covering the head, it was said to be cursed. Babies born on certain unlucky days were marked as potential Strigoi. Even red hair or physical deformities were viewed with suspicion. It meant the threat of the Strigoi wasn't far away. It was in your own village, your own family, maybe even in the cradle beside you. The ancient roots of the Strigoi weren't just about monsters. They were about explaining the unexplainable. Why did infants die suddenly in their sleep? Why did epidemics spread so quickly in poor villages? Why did livestock perish without warning? Without modern science, people sought answers. And in the shadows of the Carpathians, the answer was the Strigoi. And yet, for every fear, there was also a defense. Even in the ancient world, rituals were created to protect the living from the dead. Villagers placed iron nails in coffins, believing the metal could pin the soul to the ground. They left garlic cloves at grave sites, trusting its pungent smell could ward off evil. And sometimes they performed even darker ceremonies, mutilating corpses to ensure they would never rise again. But this was only the beginning. As we move forward into the Middle Ages, the Strigoi would transform from whispered spirits into real terrors, creatures so feared that communities would perform gruesome midnight rituals to ward them off. If you thought the Strigoi were just spirits of the dead, you'd be only half right. Romanian folklore describes two kinds of Strigoi, and the truth is far more chilling. There are the Strigoi Seven, the living ones, and the Strigoi Morți, the dead. The Strigoi V, the living vampires. The Strigoi V were not corpses. They were people still alive, cursed from birth or transformed later in life. These were individuals marked by fate, children born on unlucky days, people with a caul over their face at birth, or those who lived lives of greed, cruelty, or sorcery. The curse meant that even while alive, they carried a dark hunger. Legends say the Strigoi Zes could transform into animals, wolves, bats, or even cats, slipping into homes under the cover of night. Once inside, they would drain the life force of their victims, not always leaving a mark, but leaving behind weakness, fever, or an unexplained, wasting sickness. Worse still, the Strigoi Sea were said to have the power to torment their own families. A husband could secretly become a Strigoi and feed on his wife at night. A mother could harm her own children, curse to steal their lives without even realizing it. The Strigoi Morți, the dead that walked. But if the Strigoi Sirin were frightening, the Strigoi Morți were even more terrifying. These were the corpses of the dead who refused to rest. Villagers feared that certain souls could not leave their bodies, rising again at night to haunt the living. The signs were horrifying. A body buried in the ground might be heard screaming, moaning, or even shifting inside the coffin. When the grave was opened, the corpse sometimes appeared strangely preserved, its cheeks flushed with color, its mouth stained with fresh blood. To villagers, this was proof. The dead had risen. The Strigoi Morți was feeding. How to stop them? But what could you do if you suspected a Strigoi was attacking your family? The rituals were brutal, but they revealed just how real this fear was. Villagers might dig up the grave at midnight, a priest standing by with holy water. If the corpse looked suspicious, too fresh, too lifelike, they would drive a wooden stake through the heart. Sometimes they would even decapitate the body and burn the remains to ash, scattering them to the winds. To modern ears, it sounds barbaric, but to the villagers, it was a matter of survival. To leave a Strigoi unchecked meant the whole community could fall victim. The blurred line between life and death. What's fascinating and terrifying about these legends is how they blur the line between the living and the dead. A Strigoi didn't have to be a corpse clawing out of the ground. It could be your neighbor, your friend, even someone inside your own home. Imagine the paranoia this created in small villages. Every sudden illness, every unexplained death, every bad harvest, all of it could be blamed on a Strigoi. No one was safe, and no one could be fully trusted. The Strigoi, both living and dead, were not just myths. They were explanations for fear, sickness, and tragedy in a world that had no answers. But soon the terror of the Strigoi would go beyond rumors. Because in the medieval period, entire villages would rise against suspected Strigoi, performing real exorcisms and rituals so extreme, they still shock us today. For medieval Romanians, the Strigoi were not just stories whispered by the fire, they were a daily terror. People lived in constant fear that a loved one, or even they themselves, might rise as a Strigoi after death. And so, entire communities developed rituals to stop the curse before it began. Preventing a Strigoi at birth. The fear began with childbirth. A baby born under an unlucky star, or with a strange mark, might be declared cursed, a potential Strigoi. Mothers were told to perform protective rites, sprinkling holy water over the child, placing garlic near the cradle, even tying a red thread around the infant's wrist to ward off evil. But still, suspicion lingered. If the child grew sickly or behaved strangely, whispers of Strigoi would follow them all their life. The vigil at death. When someone died, the fear intensified. The living gathered around the body, watching carefully for signs. If a cat jumped over the coffin, or if the body didn't grow cold quickly enough, people panicked. Why? Because it meant the soul might not be at rest. To stop this, villagers performed rituals. Coins placed over the eyes. Needles or thorns pushed into the corpse's heart. Garlic is placed in the mouth, ears, or even between the toes. The goal was simple: trap the soul and prevent it from ever returning. The midnight exhumations. But sometimes prevention wasn't enough. When sickness spread through a village, when livestock died mysteriously, or when nightmares plagued entire families, people turned to a desperate solution: digging up the dead. Imagine it. Midnight. A group of villagers with shovels, torches, and holy icons. They march to the graveyard, their breath white in the cold night air. The priest mutters prayers, the men dig, and then silence. The coffin is lifted, the lid is pried open, and there, lying inside, is the corpse. But to their horror, it doesn't look dead. The face is too fresh. The lips are red, as if stained with blood. The body is unnaturally full, as though well fed. To them, this was proof, a Strigoi. Destroying the Strigoi. The next steps were brutal. First, a wooden stake through the heart. Some regions preferred iron or even a burning poker. If the corpse groaned, and sometimes it did as trapped gases escaped, the villagers took it as a sign that the Strigoi's power was breaking. Then came the fire. The body was cut into pieces, burned to ash, and the remains scattered far from the village. In some cases, the ashes were mixed with water and given to the afflicted family to drink. A horrifying cure meant to break the Strigoi's curse. Real cases recorded in history. This wasn't just folklore. Documents from the 17th and 18th centuries describe villagers in Romania and neighboring regions performing these exact rituals. One chilling record tells of villagers exhuming a body, finding it fresh with blood at the lips, and cutting out the heart. They burned it and fed the ashes to a sick relative, believing it would save them. Another case in the 1700s involved authorities who tried to ban these practices, only to find entire communities refusing to obey. For them, the fear of Strigoi outweighed even the law. The legacy of terror. These rituals show just how deep the terror of the Strigoi ran. People were willing to desecrate graves, burn bodies, and even consume human remains, all because they believed it was the only way to protect their families. And this isn't medieval superstition alone. Some of these practices persisted well into the 19th and even the 20th century in remote villages, where folklore remains stronger than science. The Strigoi were more than just ghosts or vampires. They were a force of fear that dictated how people lived, how they died, and even how they treated the bodies of their loved ones. But this is only part of the story, because while villagers performed these rituals in secret, the myth of the Strigoi began to catch the attention of outsiders, scholars, travelers, and eventually writers. And it was from these tales that the seeds of Dracula himself were sown. The 18th and 19th centuries changed everything. Western Europe was undergoing its age of enlightenment. Science was rising. Superstition was supposed to be fading. And yet reports of vampire exhumations in Romania began reaching foreign scholars. These were not just whispered rumors. They were written down in official documents, studied, debated, and sometimes ridiculed. Travelers wrote of villages digging up bodies, finding them fresh with blood, and destroying them in violent rituals. Some dismissed these as tales of backward peasants. Others, however, were captivated. One of these fascinated observers was Bram Stoker. Though Irish by birth, he was drawn to Eastern European legends, especially those of Transylvania. When Stoker published Dracula in 1897, he combined centuries of Strigoi folklore with historical figures like Vlad the Impaler. But make no mistake, at its heart, Dracula is the Strigoi, the power to rise from the grave, to drink the life of the living, to spread fear like a disease. All of it comes straight from Romanian legend. The Western transformation. What's fascinating is how much has changed in translation. The Strigoi were not pale, elegant aristocrats with flowing capes. They were filthy, terrifying, sometimes even pathetic creatures, reminders of death and decay. But as their legend crossed into the West, writers reshaped them. They became charming, seductive, and almost romantic. The vampire was reborn, but its roots remained firmly in Romanian soil. You might think the Strigoi are just dusty legends, lost to time. But the truth is, belief in them never fully disappeared. Even in the 20th century, villagers in Romania were still performing rituals against suspected Strigoi. In 2004, a case shocked the world when 6 villagers in Marotinul de Sus dug up the body of a man they believed had become a Strigoi. They removed his heart, burned it, and mixed the ashes into a drink for his niece, who had been suffering from mysterious illnesses. This wasn't medieval history. This was the 21st century. The authorities arrested the villagers, but locals defended them. To them, the ritual wasn't murder or superstition. It was protection. Strigoi in popular culture. The legend lives on in movies, books, and games. From The Strain by Guillermo del Toro, to the Witcher series, to countless horror films. Echoes of the Strigoi still shape the way we imagine vampires today. But in Romania, the Strigoi are not fiction. They remain a lingering fear, a whispered threat, a reminder that the dead may not rest as easily as we like to believe. Why did the Strigoi grip the human imagination so tightly? The answer lies in their symbolism. The Strigoi represent fear of death and the possibility that death isn't the end. Fear of disease in times before science, when plagues swept through villages without explanation. Fear of betrayal, that even family could harm you, whether alive or after death. The Strigoi are mirrors of human anxiety. They embody the idea that the people closest to us may not be who they seem, and perhaps that's why they still terrify us. Because deep down, these fears are timeless. Long before Bram Stoker imagined Count Dracula, before Hollywood put vampires on the silver screen, there were the Strigoi. They haunted Romanian villages for centuries, shaping daily life, rituals, and even the way people buried their dead. They were not elegant immortals, but grotesque, terrifying figures, born from grief, paranoia, and the mysteries of life and death. And yet their influence reached far beyond Romania. They gave birth to one of the most enduring monsters in human imagination. Conclusion: the legacy of fear. So, were the Strigoi real, or were they just stories? Folklore invented to explain what people could not understand? The truth lies somewhere in between. Whether real or not, the Strigoi shaped history. They left behind rituals, documents, and stories that still haunt us today. And in many ways, they never truly disappeared. They simply changed form, from whispers in a Romanian village, to pages in Bram Stoker's novel, to shadows flickering on a cinema screen. The Strigoi remind us of a universal truth, that fear itself has power. And sometimes it is fear, not monsters, that refuses to die.
hang out the whole next day, laughing, having fun. Getting sprung. We used to dance the night away, hang out the whole next day, laugh